So
First of all, as you all know from the program, this is the interview with the Cordwainer Smith Rediscovery Award, and I am here to announce that the winner of the Cordwainer Smith Rediscovery Award at Readercon this year is none other than Katherine MacLean. I haven't seen Kate in almost 25 years, if not a little more than that, maybe as much as 30. And when I first met her, most of the time it was with Judith Merrill, and I had the wonderful experience and good fortune and just damned exciting time of basically sitting at their feet and listening to these what back then I used to describe as two amazing women go on. Of course, they were two amazing people. What about the ideas that they were thinking of at this particular time? They, of course, they were two wonderful people, two of the most amazing people. I'd never heard conversation like that before or since. And as soon as I started talking with Kate, it all started again, which is a wonderful thing. Kate was born on January 22nd in 1925 in Glen Ridge, New Jersey. Is that where you started?
Yeah, Montclair, and the Glen Ridge was the hospital. Never mind, I don't remember that anyway.
All right. In her first story, was a story called Defense Mechanism that came out in Astounding in 1949, and a novella that she wrote in 1947 in Communicado was published in 1950, also in Astounding. There's a anecdote that the Wikipedia article on Kate tells, and let me see if I should have marked it here. I didn't, but I think I can find it anyway. She was walking down Fifth Avenue. Let me just try and condense it. She was walking down Fifth Avenue one evening,
I was taking a break from having typed like 24 hours, and I wanted to go get some coffee somewhere, and I found Fifth Avenue was shut down. I didn't know what time of night it was.
Right. Yeah, but there was one door that was open, or
yeah, one big door. It was a conference, electronic engineers conference.
You want to tell the whole thing? Go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. Because I never answered the forms when they asked me who I am and all that stuff for these writers' encyclopedias, because they start out by saying, "How many books have you written?" Well, the first 4 times I got the form, I hadn't written any books. And if I put in 0, I'd written a lot of short stories and they'd all gotten into anthologies almost immediately. But they didn't ask that. And I was enraged at the remembrance that I'd go to the library once and asked for Stephen Vincent Benet. They didn't have a card on him. He was the greatest writer and one of the semi-greatest poets that America ever produced. But he only wrote short stories, and they didn't have a card on him in the library. And he was in all the anthologies. The anthologies were listed under the names of the editors. Nobody knew. When they buy an anthology, they're looking for the writers, not the editors. So it was a complete, and the library, as far as I know, still do that. So I expected when they said, how many books have you written? I'm never going to get into the libraries, because I haven't written any books. Well, I think this is why science fiction writers started writing books. It's a big grind writing a long book on one idea. When you can put the idea into a short story, drop that, sell it, get your money, and write another short story. But they all grind away and now make a lot of books. I think it's just to get into the libraries.
Well, let me just go on with the anecdote as Kate described it here. A few years after the publication of my first story, Incommunicado, written in 1947 and published in 1950, I was taking a break from 2 weeks of typing, walking down Fifth Avenue, noticing vaguely that there were no coffee shops, and the storefronts were closed and it was dark. Past a white granite entrance with signs announcing a convention of electronic engineers, and turned in hoping to find coffee and a demo of hi-fi advances, and found a deserted desk with signs announcing that one must sign in with name, industry, and an invitation number. A bit unwelcoming to a stray writer with no credentials and heavily funded industrial research and no formal invitation. Being stubborn and not wanting to return to the typewriter so early, I hastily looked around for a door to a lecture hall where I could sneak some listening time and get a line on current research and be out of sight before the desk is reoccupied by the guardian of the gate. Too late. A man built like a fullback in a business suit was bearing down on me. I see you don't have a badge. May I ask your name? I'll look it up in the registry. He was huge, like John Campbell, the editor of Astounding, just as intense and tight and unrelaxed, wearing a formal suit. Behind him, chatting to each other and drifting closer, were 2 or 3 other impressive and ambitious tense men in business suits. Definitely not the harmless, willowy professor type. Industrial researchers were apparently built like Vikings and aggressive. I became aware I had not showered or even combed my hair since God knows when. I felt sticky, but I bluffed it out, extended my sweaty hand with matching vigor and said, Katherine MacLean, I came in because I'm interested in... He interrupted. Katherine MacLean? Are you that Katherine MacLean? He gripped my hand and hung up. Who was that, Katherine MacLean? I was being mistaken for someone else? Are you the Katherine MacLean who wrote Incommunicado? Speechless with relief, I nodded. I would not be arrested or thrown out if they would accept me as a science fiction writer. He kept his grip on my hand and turned around and bellowed to his group of chatting friends, guess who we've got here? Who wrote Incommunicado? Don't you love the pictures? He turned me around and wanted to shake my sticky hand with all of them. I wiped it on my jacket and stepped back. My hair felt sticky, my face felt sticky. I was ashamed of being so disheveled and unprepared to discuss electronic theory. While they were suggesting coffee and sitting down to talk, I explained I had a hot story on a typewriter and had to get back to it before I lost the train of ideas and escaped. I had not been aware that my playing with communication ideas would attract the attention of prestigious Bell telephone researchers. I had left radio and wavelength theory to my dad as one of his hobbies and learned early that I could get a nasty shock from playing with his wiring. I could not account for their enthusiasm. I went back to the typewriter and lost myself in the story. I will finish up this introduction with just a quick note. For, I think, the first 25 years of my, 25 years of my writing career, one of the things that I said immediately upon being interviewed or asked about anything, and I stopped only because I thought people had gotten tired of hearing it, but I break it out now, and it's as true now as it was then. Theodore Sturgeon may have been the writer who taught me how to write science fiction, but Katherine MacLean was the writer who taught me how to write. And I'm very, very happy to be here and getting a chance to ask her some questions this morning. Kate, you come from, dare I say, a generation of writers who, among other things, made science fiction what it is. And one of the things that you guys did is you were really, really, even though you are an amazing writer. For a writer like you and the writers around you, the thing that you were most interested in, I gather, was the ideas themselves.
Say that in spades.
Okay, yeah. what are some of the ideas that you're interested in now? What are some of the ideas that you were interested in then? How do they relate to one another? And talk about the place of ideas in your own work and in science fiction in general.
Oh, you couldn't stop me.
Okay.
I have a subscription, a free subscription on the net to Nature magazine, which at the time I got the subscription was the British counterpart of Science magazine, which gives you the original research in their original terminology. So you're working at it like you're working at Sumerian, because it's pretty close, because they're inventing the words to cover what they're doing. It's all so new. Well, as the minute I got this subscription, Nature magazine started blossoming out into whole separate magazines, because their research had accelerated so much that there was 20 articles per magazine, and at that point they split into subtopics. And now they have like maybe 8 magazines or more with different titles about the subtopics of what they're researching. And every morning when I get up, if I go to the computer, I open up, I find I have had this barrage of maybe 4 technical journals with 20 articles per each about vastly new things that have just been discovered. I mean, they've been researching, and as soon as they're sure that they're on a hot topic and something is causing something else that's important, they write it up while they're still doing the thing, and write up how they're doing it and how many mice they've got involved, and other universities reading this little article jump in, because they've got a lot of graduate students who want to get in their PhDs and want to get into publication. They pick it up with their laboratories handy, full of rats or rabbits or something like that, and start replicating this and going off in slightly different directions. And so the next, in about 6 months, you get this barrage of other things splitting off from that original article. And there was 20 articles. And I'm trying to follow all this. And it's taking up too much of my morning. By the time I get up, I'll get away from the computer, I am pretty stiffened up. I'm just with my thumb. It's the only thing that's getting any exercise. And the arrow is jumping all over the screen. And following up their references. When they do a research, they refer to other articles that they've read that already start to prove their guess about what is causing what. Now, what is causing what? I am very pleased to see that what is causing what is what the first idea I sold, and why I wanted to write, besides the rocket ship and electronics and all that, you know, the Coriolis effect and all that, which was the first story in Communicatum. It threw in the electronics stuff too, and the language. That was my first story. My second story from then on has been pushing the idea that every bit of our evolution is still recorded in every one of our cells, and as well as a complete blueprint of the latest changes. And it's all alterations on top of the original blueprint, which was from a paramecium or something. And we are still carrying this legacy with us. This is something, I would think something has to be done. We are full of the instincts that are suitable to parameciums, amoebas, fish, and they are present. And this is what's interfering, why emotion, which is the original recording of actions that we want to do, and you do for joy, and that's what the animals do. They have actions, impulses, instincts, and you do it for joy. And maybe you learn from the results of what your action was, if you're an animal, and if you're a human, you get conditioned. Well, conditioning is a lot fancier than just, you know, you like things that you associate with food. I mean, these Skinner people were real morons. And they took over a university I was trying to get a PhD in, and wouldn't accept my ideas because they weren't simple enough as their ideas. Everything is a conditioned reflex depending on what you ate. Well, that's not it. We go back to paramecium. Paramecium. why do human beings, when they are confronted with a difficult, insoluble problem, or when they're trying to get to the kitchen and they're tripping over the clothes they dropped on the floor last night, go into a rage and start beating on inanimate objects? Well, because they've got the instincts of paramecium, who had no eyes, but they know when they're being obstructed by seaweed. And when they're obstructed by seaweed, they butt into everything. And that's their instinct. Now,
we're still trying to butt out of the seaweed.
Yeah, but we're still trying to butt out of seaweed. If you get into water, it's difficult sometimes to get into the ocean, you know, or into the lake. But once you get in up to here, you feel at home and you wish you'd never have to come out. We were fish for billions of years, and we've only been humans for hundreds of thousands or millions. So why are our human instincts of companionship and taking care of your family and fighting for your land, these are our human instincts. Fight for territory. And why is that a joy and nobility? And feels right to fight for your territory, even if we're invading Vietnam. It feels like nobility. It's because it was the way we survived against packs of saber-toothed tigers, packs of other kinds of apes, and you did that for your family, and there was nobility. You fought anything that looked different, and that was nobility and great and courage. Well, it isn't nobility and great and courage to invade Vietnam. It really isn't. And yet, you can talk any number of young men into fighting as long as you say our territory is being invaded or one of ours has been killed. And we've got to go show those bastards that they shouldn't kill any of us. And we are endangering the entire world because we've got these instincts. And they are joys, and nobody wants to get rid of them. All evolutionarily compulsive actions are joy. And we need joy. It's tough being in a civilized country and being not able to do anything you want to do when you're a kid.
I guess what we need is more sophisticated notions of territory, more intellectualized notions of what our territory is.
No, we need to get into the DNA and take the paramecium out.
That's the quick and dirty way to do it, and probably the most efficient.
They're closing in on that.
Yeah.
They're getting so that they can manipulate the DNA without killing it. It's getting so you'll be able to get an injection of something that will get you rid of blind rage. We will never be safe from blowing up our planet until we get rid of that. And it's considered, blind rage is considered admirable with some people. They consider that's manly to occasionally roar and break something, when you should be just trying to make the can opener work. Throwing the can across the room. So this was my motive. This is why I got into writing. I wanted them to get into DNA, which is incredibly complicated. It's a Swiss watch with thousands of little parts, each one interacting, and a lot of unnecessary complications because you've got to adapt your instincts as a fish to your behavior as a human. And this is why it's tough being a kid. When you're a kid, you know, you want to be a monkey and climb trees. You want to be a tribal animal and fight the other tribe. You know, you build a hut, and a bunch of other kids build another hut 5 blocks down the street. You take your gang in the dark and you tear down his hut, and their hut, and they come and tear down your hut, and it feels wonderful. When you put up a flag, it's all instinctive. You've got a flag, you've got a secret language. We're recapitulating ontogeny. That's what that word means. Phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny. I've forgotten how to pronounce it now, but it's the root of it. We are, as we grow up, recapitulating the whole history of living beings. And it feels right every step of the way. When you're a kid, you don't like being reined in. You want to run around and explore by butting into things, not by being sat and talked to.
Yeah.
And the kids should have that freedom as long as it's a joy, and that's one of the basic joys. Anyhow, I had to write stories I wrote 3 stories that made it not just simple, but the pursuit of immortality and the pursuit of beauty and intelligence and genetic engineering. The last one was called The Diploids, and we haven't gotten to that stage, but you know, progress is going along. And in the Diploids, there is a semi-secret laboratory under laws that make it illegal, who are selling beauty to the idiots, the rich idiots who want their children to be beautiful. And they're sneaking in intelligence and a reduced aggression and the same thing. And they're having a lovely time, like researchers in laboratories have. Research is joyful. It's exploration. You're exploring over the next mountain and see what's there. And I feel it's possible that my stories, because nobody else was doing this in science fiction, and nobody else was doing this in articles, my stories are what are powering, what got them into the attitude that they can get beauty and intelligence and so forth like that at their fingertips. And not to sell it, but to have it. We want to have this. The researchers want to have this. They want to have immortality before they get old and die. They want to have beauty, so that they, in spite of being nerds in a laboratory, they can attract the opposite sex.
All right, do we have any questions? Are there any, let's open this up and make this a conversation with Katherine. David?
I admit to being fascinated by the history and development of the people in the science fiction field in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. Can you talk about what it was like in the late 1940s to get like out of college and become a science fiction writer?
Well, it was very easy to become a science fiction writer. Campbell was ready to buy and publish any original idea about the future or about the evolution on other planets. And he had this universal problem of what looks like ESP among all writers, that every time one person got an original idea, somebody else chased away, got the same idea, and they both started typing simultaneously, and the stories came in the same week. And who was he supposed to give which one was he supposed to buy? 2 people had knocked themselves out writing a good story on this totally original idea. And if he published them both at once, the readers would complain that one was plagiarizing the other. And Campbell worried about that a lot because he knew they were all had tremendous hopes of themselves as writers. This is all new, this science fiction.
Yeah,
Before that,
Phil Glass told me that very early in his career, as he was just starting to publish, his great desire was to get into Astounding, into Campbell's Astounding, and that he kept having these ideas and finding that Robert A. Heinlein had finished the story before he did.
Did you hear that?
I didn't hear your question.
Oh,
David.
let me repeat this. Let me repeat David's. He said that when he talked to Philip Glass, and that Phil had said that one of his great ambitions was to get a story into Astounding, and every time he would write a story with a hope that Astounding would publish it, he would discover that 3 weeks or 3 months ago, Robert Heinlein had written a story about the same idea. And so he was always aced out by Heinlein, often by a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And apparently this happened several times.
Yeah, well, that was true. And one of the great payoffs of being a science fiction writer was once a month we had a party. And like 8 science fiction writers, practically the only science fiction writers in the world, had a party. We all swapped ideas and got drunk on ideas, staying up all night talking to each other. And that's partially because we hadn't talked at all to anybody. When you're writing, you can't talk to anybody. You aren't, you know this. You are not yourself. You are the 4 major characters in your story, and you can't talk to anybody as yourself, or you'll blow it. So we were terribly lonesome, and we arrived at this party terribly lonesome, and sparked each other with full of ideas and talked all night. And Phil Klass was one of the most funny. I have never seen anybody that has such a sense of humor. Charlie Chaplin couldn't touch it. He had the way he told us a joke, even if he didn't make it up, had tragedy and fate and misery made into a joke. And it was funny, but you were feeling like you were laughing in one of the Greek tragedies.
Yeah.
He had this sense of history. And there were other people that were great at these parties, but he was unique.
Uh-huh.
Who else?
Who else can you
Who
remember?
else was there?
Who else was there?
Besides Phil. Who else was there at those parties besides Phil Klass? Who can you remember?
Well, the first thing I remember, because I was just looking, it was Ted Sturgeon.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, golly. Think of them in one breath.
Okay.
But Ted Sturgeon, all right, you wouldn't believe Ted Sturgeon. People keep saying, on the covers, they show him with little horns or, like that. He was a pan. It was almost a total pan. I was surprised he had shoes instead of hoofs. It was a magical pan. He was like the one in the Dr. Somebody's Magical Circus movie.
Oh,
He was a magical pan.
Lau.
Anybody,
Dr. Lau. Was there.
Dr. Lau, yes. Anybody in his presence started losing their inhibitions. It was like he was passing out Irish whiskey. And it was incredible. I needed that. I was brought up very puritanical, and it was indeed. I had most puritanical opinions and a belief that I should tolerate other people's opinions, keeping me from saying they're all talking dirty. And I said, well, everybody has a right to talk anyway at all.
We have Paul DeFilippo.
Yes, Katherine, your husband mentioned you've been part of the Milford conferences, the workshops.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk about that a little? Those were some famous...
That was one of Judy's organizations, and she had a mother who, she was from a Jewish family that were reformers right from the beginning, by the generation. Her mother was a brilliant reformer, and Judy pretended her mother was senile because she didn't want competition in her own thinking, and she didn't want to be secondhand on her mother. But everything Judy did was directed towards reform, towards women's lib, the equality of women more than anything else, and towards, of course, the usual thing was trying to avoid the current war pushes and trying to tone down this idea that unless you wanted to go off and kill foreigners, you were a traitor. And she was fighting this, and she was putting out, and she started assembling good stories that pushed the right ideas as far as she was concerned. Women's lib was the primary, but, things were very bad for women at the time.
Sure.
I couldn't get any reference works in the library. They wanted me to read Dr. Seuss. Every time I went to the library, they'd switch me into the children's section. Maybe I was a child, but if they just asked me a few questions, they'd find out I wanted to look up some medical reference or some idea I had to verify it or discredit it. I was thinking of new ideas. Anyhow, oh God, now my conversation splits in two directions. Judy was very argumentative. She was great on paper. She wrote letters to everybody. She discussed their ideas on paper. They were so glad, these writers, to find somebody out there who understood what they were talking about. And they'd write back very warmly, and she'd like that. She wasn't very attractive, so she liked guys who wrote warmly too. Side motives come in. And when they got face to face, she wouldn't let anybody get a word in edgewise. If you disagreed with her, instead of listening to the disagreement, she'd yell. Sounds like my ex-husband. But he's a man, they're supposed to do that. Now, so, I mean,
Go on.
I don't know, it's where it split off was women, the status of women at the time.
Yeah.
Well, I had written this really laborious work. I had been given a gift of time by a most peculiar and unpleasant way. When it came time for me to graduate from my college, I found they were holding up my diploma because I hadn't worn the right shoes in the gym. You're supposed to wear a certain kind of sandal, no, a certain kind of sneaker, yeah. And I already was wearing sneakers. And I was always late to gym, so I'd just rush in wearing my regular sneakers. I didn't see it would do any harm to the floor. And the gym teacher was harboring a grudge. When it came time for me to get my degree, I didn't get my degree because I had to catch up with a great many terms of gymnasium. So I was stuck with another year of staying at Barnard College, which is a real grind school and highly scholarly, just doing gym. So I thought, well, here's my chance to write. I could see the only way, because the only way I could get any ideas out into the science world. I was a kid, I was a genius kid with science. And it was just because that's what I was interested in. And I wouldn't let anybody steer me into being interested in clothes, you know, boys, anything. I was interested in science and also developing muscles, so if any guy got too close to me, he'd clobber.
Is this when you wrote stories like And Be Merry? Is that from that period, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Which is an interesting story, which is a wonderful, wonderful story, which has a very kind of, there's a lot of different attitudes towards the relationship of men and women figured in the story, both as a dangerous thing and also as a nurturing thing.
Judy was absolutely right. A fictional woman at that time was good for nothing but to scream and be rescued by the hero. She had no, and they apparently, even the science fiction male fans, thought that their version of woman was she stays home and eats candy all day. They don't know, apparently they think the floor sweeps itself, the dishes wash themselves, the kids change their own diapers, and she lies around and eats candy and waits for the husband to come home and screw her. And this is their version of a mother, of a woman. Well, this is not my version of a woman. I never met any woman like that.
Do you want to tell people, And Be Merry, how many of you know the story And Be Merry? So why don't you give us a little quick summation, and then you all go out and read it. Okay, that's your assignment.
I was told when I wrote this Elephant of Incommunicado, that John Campbell, having read it, went around telling everybody that an engineer had written it. He'd finally gotten a real engineer to write some real science fiction. And his sub-editor called me up and was surprised that MacLean, K, I had been warned not to use a female name, first name, so I just used the alphabet K. And MacLean was a girl. And he said that John Campbell would never forgive me for having put him in a position of making a fool of himself, going around telling everybody I was an engineer.
As though engineer and girl are opposites.
Yeah, that's right. So he said, you've got to delay sending us the story. I'll send it back to you, supposedly to be rewritten somewhat. And you've got to delay it long enough for him and everybody else to forget what he said. I didn't want to delay. I just spent this entire thing doing basketball, you know, and all that stuff, and writing, and not speaking to anybody because I was so concentrated on this story, and it was covered with my sweat and finger calluses from typing. At that time, you couldn't use a machine to erase what you'd done that was wrong. You had to retype every page if you added another paragraph in the middle. then you'd have to stretch the page by putting another paragraph in, and then you stretch all the other pages to allow for the paragraph. And I was exhausted, and I was frustrated, and I was lonesome. And I wanted to meet all the other science fiction writers because I was a science fiction fan of the most intense, you know. Life was me. I would go to the magazine rack twice before the magazine came out, knowing when the magazine came out. I'd go 2 days in a row twice, in the best hope that it would come out a day early, or 2 days early. And I'd be going to walk down, you know, many blocks to buy it. So I wanted to meet these other writers. They were gods. Lester Del Rey, when I met Lester Del Rey and shook hands with him, I almost fainted. He'd written a story about a nuclear power plant, when there had been no nuclear power plants, and it hadn't even been dreamed of, having a runaway disaster of the exact sort, and how it was dealt with. I felt like I was shaking hands with the nuclear power plant. I almost fell over backwards. And he was a little aggressive guy, you know. And not what you didn't look like a nuclear power plant. But that's the way science fiction writers were to me. And I was having to put off until John Campbell forgot that this story had been previously submitted by a woman.
Yeah.
And that he boasted about it was an engineer. So I was furious. But when I met Campbell, I could see he was just as sincerely dedicated. He thought women were futile little ornamental objects that had to be rescued. And there was no way to get this out of his mind. So I had to write some stories in which the woman had a wife, the woman had a man, and she was sneaking in some research when the man was out on his archaeological expedition.
Yeah.
And it was, yeah, that was Anne B. Mary.
And Mary, yeah.
I recall years ago you told me about you and Lester Del Rey hitchhiking to PhilCon because you were both nearly broke. Do you remember that?
This is a very similar thing. You got treated, the fans would treat you like you were rich just because you had stories, like you were powerful, because they wrote these stories and didn't get paid at all. They just put them out on mimeograph. We got paid a penny a word. They thought we were rich. Lester Del Rey was at the PhilCon, and I was talking with him. He was leaning up against the bar at the big, what was it? I just lost the word. Alzheimer's, where they sell things, and he was. Yeah, and he saw one of his manuscripts being sold for $300, and people were offering to buy him drinks. He said, I wish they'd offer him to buy him a sandwich. And we had to hitchhike because we couldn't afford the fees and the bus.
Yeah. I guess things have not changed quite as much as one would have hoped they might. Can you tell us about The Missing Man, which was one of the, that was 1980? Or do I have the wrong date wrong for that?
About 1975.
1975.
I mean, a brief moment of Alzheimer's there. I practically didn't remember which book, which was Missing
It's the one
Man.
who got the Nebula Award for Best Novel of the Year.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't pushing any particular idea. I was just having fun.
You were just having fun, yeah.
And the story was simply about an advanced New York City in which people had pretty well, a lot of them moved out. These sub-villages had incorporated as villages. Chinatown was Chinese, and there was an Arabic enclave from the Arabs having lost the war with Israel, and mostly moved out. And which never happened, but it could have happened. We were looking ahead on that one.
Right.
And it was just a ESP guy who was a very normal a normal, ordinary guy who could feel other people's feelings and attitudes. And people who were, and he used it to rescue people in deep trouble, like sending rescue squad of the fire department. And he managed to get himself hired as an expert, otherwise there wasn't any such job, as a consultant expert. And that's the general idea. He had a lot of adventures.
One of the things that was happening in the 50s is there was something called the Rhine Institute, and
that was nowhere. I mean, of course, they proved it in such a boring way that people thought it had to be science. But there were a lot of so many verified anecdotes about things that had happened that were verified. Like Stephen King's little girl that got very angry and threw everything around, including gasoline, and burned her school up. They found that every so often, if you look in the newspaper, you look at the clippings, there is a case of things throwing themselves around, and a mother who is very hoity-toity and won't let her little girl play or do anything for fear of getting a spot on her dress, she calls and says that there are a lot of little boys around throwing things, that I can't catch them. Would you please catch these little boys and punish them or make them stop? Well, there weren't any little boys. There was just this little girl sitting there dressed and not making a spot by not playing or doing anything, making everything throw themselves around out of sheer rage. And the cops find this, they surround the place with cops, but things keep spinning around. They miss everybody. They're not actually killing anybody, and the little girl is in the middle. And this is such a repeating case that Stephen King was right in using that as a plot basis for a novel.
One of the things I think one of the things that characterized a lot of the conversation at this time was possibly because places like the Rhine Institute were actually taking ESP phenomena fairly seriously. People would discuss it as a serious possibility.
Yeah, but you could discuss it cold and dry by discussing the mathematics of the possibility of these cards turning up accidentally when the people say they were going to turn up. If you talk about the little girls and the things throwing themselves around, people say, yeah, you'll believe anything, won't you? Yeah. And they say that's the phony press making that stuff up. And it wasn't. It was just the cops that saw this happening would testify if you asked. What?
That goes on with that. Wasn't there an incident at one of the Milford conferences where they had been fooling around with a Ouija board and everybody got scared?
Nobody, as I said, nobody believes you when you come up with the stuff, the hot stuff. They think it's been made up because it's hot and interesting and magical. Well, there's a lot of magic going around, and it's not reciting things like Harry Potter. Magic, the true magic is things that happen out of your deep emotions. And the only thing I can think of is that somewhere along the way of evolution, all the animals went in and out of using ESP and so forth, and then it turned out to have disadvantages, so it got suppressed again. But it's in there.
For anybody who's been seen me wandering around Readercon for the last 5 years, I've usually had a copy of Spinoza with me, and one of the things, he's a guy who, among other things, wrote the first book against the notion of miracles, to prove that his Tractatus, that Wittgenstein named his Tractatus after, Spinoza's Tractatus Theologicus Politicus. But anyway, the whole arguing intelligently about, dare we say, supernatural phenomena is a long, has a real history in science fiction studies, and it's worth some of the arguments like Spinoza's are still very, very interesting, and I would recommend them. He did not believe in miracles at all there in the middle of the 17th century.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
Because we should continue that. When people believe there is magic coming directly out of the brain, they're going to sit around seething with revenge and trying to blast their enemies.
Yeah.
And it's a big waste of time, and it encourages revenge. Mostly revenge is what people want magic for.
Yes, exactly.
And they want to be secretive about it. And this is nothing should be encouraged. But there is magic, and to hell with it. Except my dad, an engineer with patents and lots of common sense, he, when I finally got him to read a science fiction magazine because it had my story in it, he immediately started writing letters to Campbell, and Campbell was writing back and forth, and my dad at that time was investigating dowsing because he wanted to douse out, he was designing factories, and he wanted to douse out where the old power lines and sewer pipes were from the previous factory that had just gotten torn down, and by somebody else's factory. And he got paid for designing them. He'd walk the lines and put down, and he wouldn't put down, you've got to dig a big trench there, because he looked up dowsing, and he doused out where the lines were. And he says, if it works, it works. He says, I'm not going to call it magic or anything else, it just works. And you don't argue with things that are working. He could douse out and find a sewer line or a hot power line and mark it on the ground or mark it on a map.
We've been given our last 5 minutes. Do we have any final questions from the audience? Does anybody have a question that we can think about using this to sort of wrap up our fascinating? Oh,
I want to admit one thing. I think it was my father's fault that Campbell went off into ESP and other stuff like that antagonized his whole readership, because good researchers and good mechanics do not believe in magic.
Yeah.
And they were reading his magazine, and they didn't like him. Even my story with George, the telepath, which was missing man, antagonized a lot of people.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No. I just do we have any final questions that anyone would like to talk about? What sort of things are you say? You told me personally beforehand that you've been too busy really to do much direct writing, or to get it to the point where you're comfortable submitting it. Can you tell us anything about some of the things that you might be working on sometime soon, if you get some time? No? Okay. All right. That's a very intelligent answer, once again. Okay. We should probably wind this up then. And Katherine, thank you so much for being here and for talking with us. Thank all of you for coming, and we will see you as Readercon rolls on through Saturday and Sunday.